Hello everyone and welcome to my YouTube channel. My name is Marius and today we'll be talking about Github Actions. Github has recently introduced a new feature with the name Github Actions, which allows developers to build their own CI within their repository. So for that reason, I decided to create a tutorial around it where we're going to explore some of the features and some of the syntax which we can use to build our own pipeline. In the second phase, we will be also building a simple hello world application using React, and we're gonna create our own workflow, and which will include steps such as running unit tests, building our application, and also deploy it to an AWS S3 bucket. So without further ado, let's start. And the first thing that I did is I created those folders, and that's the default location that GitHub will look for a GitHub workflow. And as you see, I created a file with the name pr.yaml. So within that file, we're gonna set our workflow. So we'll be setting by the name of the workflow. So in that case, I will call it pull request, right? And I need to set when the workflow should be triggered. So in my case, I want it to be triggered in a pull request. So I will use the on directive, and within the array, I will set the pull request. So I can set any options that I want, but in that case, I want the workflow to trigger only in a pull request. So now I need to set some jobs. So a job is a sequence of tasks that will be running within the workflow, and each job has its own steps. So within the job, we're gonna set at some point the steps that we want to run in our pipeline. So as a start, I'm gonna set the directive of a job, and I need to set an ID to it. So in that case, I will call it PR, and I need to set where the workflow, the type of the machine that the workflow will be running. So in that case, I will be using the runs on directive, and I will use an Ubuntu 20.04. I have the option to set some environment variables. So, but in that, at the moment, I will comment it and I will come back later. And now I need to set the steps that I want to execute. So as a first step, I will set a hello world message. And to execute code, I need to set the run directive. So these will execute some bash code that I will set. So in that case, I will execute hello world. I will display to the screen hello world. And usually what you need to do is to create a commit and push this one into your pipeline. But for me to avoid doing this one, I use a tool with the name Act. So if we check here, so Act is a tool that has been developed that allows to run your own GitHub actions locally. So if you're interested more into this tool, you can go into Nyctos Act, and that's the official repository of Act. So I really like that tool, and it's very convenient for me to run GitHub actions locally and then test them. Test my actions locally and then push them into GitHub, so I make sure that they are working okay. So if you want to learn more, just have a look in the documentation. So in that case, I will use Act, and I need to set the type of event that I want to trigger. So in that case, I want to trigger a pull request. So I use Act pull request, and as we see here, I print hello world. So if my event doesn't match with the event of the workflow, then it won't be executed. So if I try for a push, so we see that nothing has been executed, and that's because we want the workflow to execute only in a pull request. The next feature which we can see is how we can set environment variables. So using the env keyword within the job, we can set global variables available to all of the steps. So in that case, I will set a message, and within the message, I will set hello world. and I can't access that message within my step. And if I try to print it and execute my action, we see that I still get the hello world message. So if I want to limit the scope of the environment variable, I can use the end directive within a step. So in that case, I can set another message that would be available within the step. And in that case, I would just set good night, and I keep the echo of the message. So if I execute the step, we see that we get good night, and that's because the scope of that environment variable is within the step and overrides what has been set before in the global scope. That's good. And currently we have only executed code that we have written, but we can also execute code that has been written by someone else, and we can reuse that logic. So the idea is that someone writes a GitHub action and we are able to use that action for our own benefit. And one such case is when we want to set the setup of the Node.js environment. So if I bring into the screen the repo of that GitHub action, so we see that that's the setup node action. And if we come down into the usage of that action, we see that we can use the users keyword and just set the name of the action. So in our case, we are interested into the users keyword, and if I plug it into my step, I need to delete this one, and I don't need this one. So, and I will rename the step into setup node. So if I execute that step, we see that a Node.js environment has been installed. However, we can also pass objects. However, we can also pass options within the actions. And in our case, we want to set a default version of Node.js environment. So in my case, I would just set 16. So if I try to execute my workflow, I see that the setup is executed, and we see that it downloads version 16. So we have two different ways on how we can execute code. So one is by reusing actions available from the web, and the other option is by writing our custom code on how we want to execute each step. We can also execute steps conditionally. So for example, if I will comment the setup node step, and I will just set another step, which it would be like the first step. And within that step, I want to execute some code, and I will just print hello world. And there are some cases that I don't want to execute that code, and some that I want. So GitHub Actions provide a feature. It allows us to use the if syntax. So, and based on that condition, the action will be executed or not. So if I say true and execute the action, we see that it's executed. But if I set false, if I type it correctly, we see that nothing is executed, and that's because of the condition. However, that's not a useful scenario that they have shown. A more useful case would be if to access information coming from the GitHub context, and based on that information to assess whether we want to execute a certain step. So in that case, what I can do is to, if I check arc, I can pass an event to it. So just to simulate the process of executing a GitHub action and also having access to a certain event. So for that case, I will be setting an event, and within the event, I want to set something, so I just gonna set a name, and that's hello world, right? So, and what I want to do is to evaluate whether the event has the hello world message, and if it has it, then I want to execute that step. So to access that information, I need to use GitHub event and the property within the JSON, and I want to evaluate it. So I will just check if it's the same with hello world, and if so, I want to execute that step. So I want to execute the event, but I also need to pass the event down to it. So if I execute it now, I see that the step is executed, and that's because the equality is true. If I change the name and set something different and re-execute the workflow, I see that nothing is printed to my console, and that's because the equality fails. We can experiment a bit more with what we have over there. So GitHub also provide functions which we can use and execute some logic. So in my case, for example, I want to see, I'm not aware of what the data available within that event. So what I want to do is to set an environment variable of the data, and I want to, because the data they're coming as a JSON data, so I want to stringify it. So I'm just gonna use the toJSON function, and I will pass the event to it. So if I try to log the data and execute my workflow, so we see that I structured my data, and I could get what I have over here. By default, GitHub appends the repository, and that's because it needs to know the repository that we're running on. And what something else which we can do is that we can also like check if something contains some information. And if we go back into our example with the if condition, rather than checking equality, we can check if something contains a value. So I want to check if the name contains hello, and if so, I want to execute hello world. And if I execute it, so we see that we get the hello world, and that's because we have hello. And if I still try with hello world, it would be executed because it would match. But if I add something that it's not included within it, I don't get anything. And what else we can do is that we can format some information. So for example, I want to set a variable with the name message, and I want to format the data available from the GitHub context, and I will use the format method. So in that case, I will set hello and just set a placeholder for my value. So in that case, I will try to access that information and print the message. And what I want to do is to set word here. So I expect to get hello world. So if I execute my event, we see that I get hello world. So it concatenate both of the strings, and it just get me the final output. We can also, so it's often we have some secret information, and we want to hide this one, and we don't want to be displayed into our logs. So what we can do is to set some secrets. So if we check arc, what we can do is to set a secret file. So if we see here, we can create a secret file and load that file. In GitHub, what you need to do is to set secrets within the repo, and the way to access it is by using the secrets dot syntax in the name of the secret that you want to access. So in my case, I may want to access secrets dot, and let's say content, right? So if I create a secret here, and that secret will be content, and just set a value. If I try to print the output, we will see that it won't be logged. So, but before doing this one, I need to load the secret file. So if we check again, so it's secret file, and if I come here, secret file, and it's secrets, and execute my run, we see that we get 3 asterisks, and GitHub recognizes that this value is a secret and won't display it into the logs. A common scenario is when you want to connect information between multiple steps. So there may be a case that you want to export information from one step and you want to access it into another step. So the way for doing it is by setting an ID in the step that you want to export information. So in my case, I will set first, and to export information, you need to use that syntax. So colon send output, the name of the export that you want to set. So in my case, it will be message, and I need to use colon and the value of the output. So I will use hello world. And now I need to set my second step, and I need to send my code. So if I want to access information from a previous step, the syntax that I need to follow is steps, and use the ID of the steps that I want to access. So in my case, it will be first, outputs, and the name of the export that I did. So in that case, it will be message. If I execute my workflow, we see that we get the hello world, and we managed to connect both of the steps. So I think I showed enough information for us to feel confident and move into building a simple workflow for a simple hello world application. So let's continue with the second phase of this tutorial, which is to build our hello world app. So I will be using npx to create a React application, and I'm just gonna call it hello world. So I will pause the video until the install is done. The install is done, and I also managed to open my editor into the hello world app. So the first thing that we'll be doing is to update the existing app. So what we want is to update the content of the app and get a hello world message. And in addition, we also want to update the unit tests so that they are passing, which will be run them and test them into our pipeline. So I will be using npm run star to start the app. So I will create some space here because I want to bring another window so that we have a view of the app. So we see at the moment we get the React icon. So what I want to do is to remove web vitals, CSS files. So we don't need web vitals. We'll remove the icon as well. And remove CSS since we won't be using them. We remove everything from here, and if I move into my app, so we remove everything, and I will create a new component, and we call that component app. I want to make a default export of the component, and within it I want to render hello world. My machine behaves a bit slow, so I need to be a bit patient. Oh, I have a typo. So if I reload the app, we see that we get the hello world message, so everything looks good. So I don't need the server anymore. So what we want to do now is to run our test. So if we go into package.json and check the scripts, we see that we have the command of test, so we can use this one to run jest. And I want to include the watch option so that it reruns when I do a change in the test. So currently we see that the tests are failing, and what we need is to update here. So we use a describe block, and this will be for the app. And we wrap this one into a need block, and what I want to get is should get hello world. So we render the component, we don't need the link element, and we need to use the get by role function to look for a heading, and then heading has the name of hello world. And we see the tests are passing now and everything looks good. So if I try to build the app, so remember that in the scripts section we have a build command. So if I run the build, we get our bundle into the build directory, and if we want to test the bundle, we can also run a server just to see like if the assets are okay. So as you see, we get a recommendation over there, so we can use the serve package, and I need to set the directory of the assets. So if we wait a bit, so we see that it runs on localhost 500 and we get hello world, which is exactly what we want. Nice. So the next thing we will be doing is to create our workflows. So I mentioned that we need to create a single workflow, but I think we can push it a step further, and we can create a workflow for PRs and workflows for the master pipeline. So we will be starting with the PR pipeline. So I'm creating the GitHub directories, workflows, and within it I will set the PR YAML. And you will see here, I created the directory and I need the file. So here I need to set the instructions for what I want to execute, but before doing that, I need to connect my app with my GitHub repo. So I managed to create a repository, so I have to connect it. I will use this one. So if I check it now, we see that it has been linked. And I would start by setting the name of my workflow. So this would be pull request pipeline. And I need to set them, I need to use the on instructions so that I tell to when I want to execute that workflow. So before we show that we can use an array and set the events, but now I want to limit the scope or when I want to execute that workflow, and it needs to be only when I raise a pull request against master. So to do this, to do it, I need to use pull request and set the branches, and the branch that I want, it should be master. So these will be raised against master. And the next thing we need to do is to set the job. So that will be the PR job. It will run on an Windy machine. And I need to set some steps within it. The first step, it will be to check out from the GitHub repo. So that would be GitHub checkout, and we need a GitHub action for this one. So the action which we can use is this one. And the second step, it will be for us to install Node. And as we saw, I was shared before, we use an action for this one, and I will bring, we need to search for this one. So if I come here, so I see that I can use those instructions, and if I paste them, and we don't need them minus over there, so we install Node.js, and if we want to make sure on what version we are running locally and what we want to run it against in our workflow, then we can make sure that those two they match. So the third thing that we want to do is to install our dependencies, and that should be with npm CI. So npm provide a nice command for installing dependencies within the pipeline, and that's CI. Because sometimes when you run npm install, it may avoid reinstalling a few packages, and in general in the pipeline we want to reinstall everything. And the next thing that we'll be doing is to run our unit test, and this will be npm run test. So now we can test our workflow. So I'll be using arc, and what I want to do now is to raise a pull request event. So if I execute my workflow, we see that it managed to install version 14. It moved into installing the dependencies. So this will take a while. And now it runs the unit test. And they pass, and we see that the workflow was successful. Nice, so now we can continue with the master workflow. And I copy the same code snippet that we wrote before, so I will update it now. So I want to raise this one only when I make a push against master. So this would be master, and I will keep those steps because we want to execute those two. And what we need to do now is to build our app. And to build our app, we need to run the npm run build. And the last step we want to execute is to upload our assets into AWS through buckets. So that would be upload static files. And to do it, we need to configure the AWS client. So to do it, we will be using an action. So that action will be, I need to bring in my browser again. So configure AWS credentials, and that's the action that we want to use. So if we check more on it, so we see that it gives us instructions on how to configure the client, and that's what we want. That's what we want actually. So we will be passing an AWS secret key, an AWS secret access key, and the AWS region to configure the client. So I will execute this command on top of the deployment step. So, and that the AWS region will be coming as a secret. Right, so I need to create those secrets and the way for doing it is to update my repository to include those secrets. So I also managed to create user sorry, so I also managed to create a user. So if I bring my repo, so here is my repo, and if I put it inside, we'll minimize this one, and if we go into settings, secrets, we see that we have an option for setting our secrets. So I want to set the secrets. So that would be access key. So this will be the access key. I want to set the secret access key, and that goes to this one. And I also need an AWS region. So in that case, I will be using uassist1. So if you try to use those secrets, they won't be valid at the time that you are watching that tutorial, because I will be remove them. So we configure our client. So what we need to do now is to run the AWS client to upload the assets into our bucket. So I have also created an S3 bucket, and since we get that error, I will print the name of it over here. So that's the name of the bucket, right? So, and the command that we want to run is AWS3. So we want to sing it, and we want to upload the build directory, and we want to upload it into our S3 bucket. So that looks good, and just let's review of what we have written. So we raise that into when we push something in master, we check out from GitHub, we install Node, we install dependencies, we run a unit test, we build the app, and then we configure the AWS client, and lastly we upload our assets. Everything looks good, and the only thing that has been left is to push our code into GitHub. So if we check our status, we see that we have files and we haven't created any branch. So I want to check out into a branch. So this is the master. So first we're gonna push into master, and then follow the workflow of raising a PR and merging it into master, because I don't have any content into master now. So it will be easier for us to push straight and then try to raise a PR like what we would normally be doing if we were within a team. So we see that we have the files. I need to add the commit now, and that should be initial commit. If I say and push origin into master, right, and we push our code. So we see that we the workflow is executed, and just remove this one. So if we move into action, we see that the GitHub picked our commit and it's executed. So install node, now it's executed and install dependencies. Interact units, build the app, upload the assets, and everything was successful. So if I bring the link, a link of one of our files in our S3 bucket, so I can use this one. So if I open it, so we see that we get our hello world, which is nice. So let's assume that we want to raise a PR for a change now. So the change will be to update the name of the hello world. So we want it to be uppercase, right? Because now we have lowercase. So in that case, we want this, and we want to update our unit as well. So that should be fine. If we run our unit, so we see that it pauses. So if I check out into development branch, right, so we see that we have 5 that we need to commit. So I want to commit the message uppercase, hello world. If I check my branches and git push origin development, right, so I raise a PR. So if we come here, we see that the PR is for updating the title and also our unit. So I want to raise that PR. If I come here into actions, I see that my PR pipeline is running. So we expect it to run the unit and avoid deploying the assets into the S3 bucket. So here are the steps, and we see that the last step will be to run the unit test. And if so, we see that we got a success study code. And if I merge it now, so my master pipeline has been triggered, and we expect to get the updated content into our S3 bucket in a moment. Hopefully we don't have any issue with caching, but the general workflow should be what we have here. So it has been deployed, and if we reload the app, we see that we get the updated content, and that's in general the workflow. That's how we can implement GitHub Actions into our GitHub repository. And as you can see, we can easily build our CI as part of our repository, which is something that hasn't been done easily in the previous years. So now we have the flexibility to integrate it into our repository, and it's very convenient. So that was the end of this tutorial. I hope you enjoyed it, and more content is coming. So until that time, enjoy your day and speak to you soon. Thank you.